So good morning and welcome again to BusinessWise Insiders. In a moment, I'll start the presentation and it'll run for about 20 minutes, after which, as Deb mentioned, we'll break into smaller groups where you'll get the chance to introduce yourselves, ask questions, and share ideas about today's topic or anything else that's on your mind. If you can, I would strongly encourage you to stick around for that portion, since the personal interaction and knowledge sharing are really the spirit of BusinessWise Insiders and can help put the themes we'll discuss today in a real-world context. And finally, just to avoid any inadvertent disruptions, I'm going to keep everyone on mute during the presentation. So if you have questions, either ask them in the chat window or save them for the breakout discussion. So let's turn to today's topic. So today we're going to look at how to develop a smart cold email strategy for 2023 based specifically on 4 key pillars that I'll get into more in a moment. But a couple quick points at the outset. First, I want to be clear that when we talk about email in the context of B2B sales, we're talking about how sales reps can use cold email in its various forms to create connections, start conversations, and generate opportunities with individual prospects. In other words, this is about email as a prospecting tool rather than as a marketing tool. Secondly, in 2023, a smart email strategy is about more than just email. And I'm going to come back to that point several times throughout the presentation. We're not just trying to answer the question, how do I write an email that generates replies and leads, or even what broader email strategy will maximize replies and leads. The question we're trying to answer is, where does email fit into a broader B2B prospecting strategy? And how can I leverage email to overcome the obstacles I face to connecting with my best prospects? And today, those obstacles are pretty substantial. You'd think that with more ways to reach prospects, it would be easier, but it's actually the opposite. Your prospects don't just sit at their desks next to their landline phones, and when the phone rings, they see who's calling it, and they can choose to ignore it. They're bombarded with emails and texts and LinkedIn messages, so it's much harder to break through the noise. And when you do, your prospects have much more control over whether they choose to connect with you. And the result is that this metaphorical wall between you and your best prospects is high and getting higher. So it takes more time and effort on your part to climb over it in order to create a connection that leads to an opportunity. And here are a few quick stats that prove the point. I gathered these from a webinar on cold email that I recently attended, hosted by Jason Bay, who runs a sales coaching organization called Outbound Squad. And his stats were that 1% is the percentage of cold emails that generate a reply, and that's any kind of reply, not even an enthusiastic one. So not interested, not right now, not a good fit. That all counts, and only 1 out of 100 cold emails generate any kind of reply. 5% is the percent of cold calls that are even picked up in the first place by a prospect. And then 1.5% is the percentage of cold call conversations once you get a prospect on the phone that lead to a positive outcome, like an appointment. So it's important to keep in mind that these represent sort of averages across all B2B sales. So depending on your industry and your approach, you might experience slightly different results. But the fact remains, cold outreach isn't easy, and it often takes a lot of time and energy just to start a conversation with the prospect, let alone set an appointment with a promising lead. And as I'll discuss in detail throughout the presentation, more than any other tool in your biz dev toolbox, email offers a key to unlocking this challenge. But when it comes to email, most sales reps fall into one of these 2 camps. Many sales reps automatically think of email not as a prospecting tool, but as a marketing tool that fails to deliver the kinds of personal connections and conversations that are so critical to sales prospecting. So they dismiss it out of hand. And then others are open to using email to connect with prospects, but they don't really know where to start. And they end up with an inconsistent scattershot approach that ultimately delivers mediocre results. So what makes the difference between an approach to email that lacks direction and focus and one that sets you up to overcome that effort reward problem? First, you want it to be consistent, and I'll dig more into this in a minute, because consistency is the key to increasing the odds of getting the right message in front of the right prospect at the right time. So rather than focusing on the success or failure of any one email message to deliver replies, think about each message as the latest tactic in an ongoing campaign where your goal is to connect with your prospect at the right moment, whenever that may be. Second, you want email to help improve your overall prospecting efficiency. So given that it takes more time and energy to reach prospects, the sales reps who use their time and energy wisely can gain a significant advantage. And then finally, of course, you want email to help you improve the overall effectiveness of your prospecting efforts, which boils down to giving your prospects a compelling reason to act and engage. And the ideas I'll cover throughout today's presentation will all be geared toward one or more of these goals. But before I dig in, I just wanted to invite Deborah to offer any introductory thoughts.
So thank you all for staying on this webinar, because here Sam is giving you all of these miserable statistics and then telling you that it's really hard even to get to these statistics, and yet you're still here. Part of that is probably because we all know that the one way to guarantee that any of this email outreach will not work is if we don't do it. So let's listen for more ideas on how to make all of this less painful.
Right, and the flip side of the grim statistics I already quoted is that if you do it right, those numbers can actually go up quite a bit. And not only if you email correctly will you get more responses, but if you combine your tools in the right way, you can boost your results across the board, and that's really the goal. So let's start with the very first obstacle you need to overcome, and that's how to break through your prospect's inbox so that they actually see, open, and read your message. And I'm guessing that this won't come as a surprise to most of you, but we are facing an inbox clutter crisis. Everyone's inbox is cluttered these days. And one of the big reasons why is that the sales industry has tried to solve that effort reward problem by flooding the zone with cold emails. You get them, I get them, everyone gets them. And yet so many sales reps approach email like our owl on the top here. They're imagining their prospect sitting at their computer with nothing to do and then devoting their full attention to any and every email they receive. So it stands to reason that if we just write a great message with a great subject line about our great product or service, that our prospect will enthusiastically reply. But it doesn't work that way. Inbox clutter means that even the best emails with the best subject lines never get seen, let alone open or read, because they get lost in the shuffle. So let's look at two key ways to overcome that problem and break through the clutter. And the first has to do with making sure your email stands out on the computer screen against all the others. And really the only tool you have for that job is your subject line. So when faced with that challenge, most sales reps will intuitively think my subject lines need to be creative and catchy to grab my prospect's attention. But that's actually the worst mindset you can have, because you might as well be putting a flashing red banner on your email that says, I'm trying to sell you something. Think about it. When's the last time you got an email from a colleague or a peer or a friend that was super creative and catchy? In fact, the most successful subject lines are the ones that look like they're coming from regular humans with a genuine question, concern, or request. They're crisp and clear. They don't make the prospect work. They're short and easy to understand. They're relevant. They give the prospect a reason to open by hinting that the email contains valuable information. And let's be honest, they're kind of boring. Marketers use flashy creative subject lines, and regular people use regular subject lines. So the first key here is don't overthink your subject line. Make it crisp and clear, make it relevant, but make it regular. And then the second key element of breaking through the inbox isn't about standing out on a computer screen on any given day. It's about maximizing the odds of breaking through over time. So there are two facts to consider here. First, as we already discussed, cold emails generate replies only 1% of the time on average. And that's not because 99% of cold emails are terrible, although a lot of them are. It's because the odds of hitting the right prospect at the right time with the right message and having them see and read it are pretty low. The second fact is that while it's impossible to know when exactly the right time will be for your prospect, that moment when they'll be open to a conversation about the problem or priority that you help address, you know you want to be at the forefront of their mind whenever that moment comes. And that requires unwavering consistency. So our first tip here is to simply follow up on the emails you send. One-off emails are easy to ignore, and following up increases the odds of a reply. Second, don't give up or get discouraged just because the first email you send doesn't get a response. Keep at it. And then finally, consider automating your email sequences. Automated campaigns never get discouraged. And as we'll discuss more later in the presentation, they can really free you up to focus on other high leverage prospecting activities. And our key points here are that it's not just you who's emailing. Other sales reps, including your competitors, are sending email too, and you have to stand out. If not now, maybe later. Now may not be the right time for your prospect, but things change and consistency is key. And then finally, focus trumps volume. So just drowning your prospects in email won't work, won't be effective. You need to use a strategy that's targeted to your best prospects, regular over time, and relevant to their needs and priorities. Deb, did you want to add anything?
We all know, Sam, that a full pipeline of legitimate prospects is the key to successful new business development. So why is it that most of our pipelines are emptier than we'd like? Well, I'm just reminding everybody that we're here for you, not only with ideas and expertise, but tools that are going to help you ease some of the burden.
Thanks, Deb. And I'll touch on some of those concepts a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, so now we have a basic strategy for breaking through the inbox clutter. So let's talk about how to ensure our emails resonate with our prospects so that they read, care, and reply. And the key here is what I'm calling to get personal. But when I say get personal, I'm not necessarily talking about the bonding and rapport type tactics where you find common interests with your prospects that you can mention, or even where you research what their company is doing so you can include a bunch of specific details. Those are good ideas for one-off emails to your highest value prospects, but they're really not workable for larger email campaigns where you're sending the same message to thousands of people. So instead, think of personalization like this. Every email is a transaction. This is especially true of cold emails where there's no prior relationship or additional context. So if you want something, a reply, you need to offer something in return, value to your prospect. And that creates a level playing field between two human professionals where you both stand to gain together. And here are a few ideas for how to convey that same concept. First, it's not about you. The prospect already knows what you want, a click, a reply, an appointment. So you need to frame that offer or request in terms of how your prospect benefits from it. So one simple way to ensure you do that is to use the second person. Use you as much as possible and stay away from I or we. Second, be real and be different. Write like a regular person writes or talks, and emphasize what you bring to the table that your prospect can't get just anywhere. That kind of genuine and specific differentiation can go a long way toward creating the impression that you're another human looking to start a mutually beneficial conversation. And then finally, make sure there are no strings attached to the email transaction. Something valuable for your prospect in exchange for their time is the only transaction on the table at this point. And this is really important, even if it never goes any further than that. So ask and answer the question, what does your prospect get from a meeting with you, even if they never become a client? Now, the second and even more powerful form of personalization comes a little bit later in the process, and that's after your prospect has replied to your email. And I'm talking about all kinds of replies, including and especially the no, not interested, or not right now replies. You might be thinking, why should I care about the no's as much as the yeses? Well, the first reason is that pretty much everyone starts off by resisting, and that's why you should care. If you're ignoring the no's, you're ignoring a huge chunk of the day-to-day of cold outreach. The second reason is, especially with email, a no gives you information and an opportunity that you can use in your quest to get personal. Moreover, you now have an opportunity to accomplish a really important objective of cold email outreach, and that's to show your prospect that there's a real live person on the other side. Your prospect's response gives you the chance to start a one-on-one conversation where you can key off the phrases in their email and include specific info that you learned from your prospect's LinkedIn profile or their company website. All of a sudden, this relatively impersonal email campaign becomes a highly personal one-on-one conversation. So it sort of takes that typical personalization set of tactics and moves it to after they reply, because that's really when you have them on the hook for a one-on-one conversation. And the three takeaways here are, first, responding promptly is really important. All you know at this point is that your email got your prospect's attention. So take advantage and get back to them while it's still top of mind. If you wait even a day, your prospect may be mentally checked out and you've lost your chance to start that conversation. Second, as I mentioned, this is your chance to show your prospect that you're a real live person by crafting a personal response. It can also flip the script pretty dramatically and disarm a prospect who's skeptical about the intent of the cold email they just received. And then finally, that initial reply is just the start of what will hopefully be a longer conversation, which you can move forward by asking questions that are designed to learn more about your prospect's mindset. And when your prospect answers, you'll have more to go on for your next response and a better idea of what kind of value they need to see to continue engaging with you. Deborah, anything here?
When we speak about conversations, you can think about this email messaging in the same way that you might think about going to a networking event or speaking with somebody face to face. It doesn't automatically become a great relationship in the first paragraph. And so you have to hang in sometimes and develop that conversation and start to develop a relationship for it to go somewhere. And maybe the somewhere means referring somebody else to that person if their priorities don't have anything to do with what you can specifically help them with. But that creates a relationship. And we all know that that's the beginning of our sales opportunities.
That's right, Deb. And I think, it may sound silly to say, oh, write a message that's relevant to them and then reply when they get back to you. But really, so many sales reps think of email as I'm sending out something. If I get an enthusiastic reply, I'll set an appointment. Otherwise, it didn't work. And that's really just not the way to think about email or cold outreach generally. Your aim is to start this conversation. And sometimes that can start with the smallest seed, even a no or not interested. So we've seen how personalization works in different email contexts. And I just wanted to spend a minute exploring that a little further because it's a fact that different kinds of cold emails have different strengths and weaknesses. And choosing the right tool for the right job can improve your overall prospecting efficiency and boost results. So very quickly, here are the 3 cold email channels that we offer to our clients here at BusinessWise. The first is your standard one-off email, which you can send to any prospect in our database with an email address. And these are great for sending highly personalized emails to your very best prospects, the ones that are worth the time and energy it takes to really customize your approach. Second, you can send an email blast where you hit your entire audience simultaneously with the same message. And these are from when you have a message you need to deliver right now, for example, for an event or during a time of year when you know your prospect will be more likely to be in the market for what you offer. And then finally, there's automated email prospecting, which automates the process of sending those one-at-a-time emails to your prospects. These are gradual and cadenced and sequenced campaigns with multiple emails to each prospect, and they're always running in the background. So here's an example of a typical automated email prospect campaign. We call it AEP that we manage for our clients. We work with clients to develop a series of 3 messages. So you have an initial message and then 2 follow-ups. And whenever a prospect replies, that sequence stops for that prospect. Each prospect receives the sequence over the course of a couple of weeks with intervals up to about a week between messages. But new prospects are only added gradually to the campaign, maybe 100 new prospects every day. So the campaign runs over several months. And the idea here is that AEP is, again, running in the background, delivering replies gradually to your inbox as long as the campaign is active. And a few quick takeaways of why diversification is important. First, a tool is only as effective as its user. It's the decisions you make about how to use and combine the tools at your disposal that make all the difference. And with that in mind, think about what you're trying to achieve in the various facets of your biz dev strategy, and then select the right tool for that job. And then finally, especially when you use automation, diversification can lead to dramatic efficiency gains that you can use to rewire your entire biz dev strategy. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But first, Deborah, do you want to add anything to close out this section? All set? Great. Okay, so yeah, I mentioned that last slide about how one of the benefits of email automation is that it can help you rewire the other elements of your biz dev strategy, which is a great segue to our next pillar of smart email lead gen in 2023. Because again, our goal as sales reps is not to become better emailers. Our goal is to create more connections with prospects that turn into opportunities and leads. And there are a number of ways to combine email with cold calling that can increase the effectiveness of both channels and contribute to a biz dev strategy that's equipped to overcome the challenges that we all currently face. But I want to go back to the very beginning of the presentation where I talked about that effort reward problem in B2B sales. And in a world where starting a conversation with your prospect is hard and getting harder, where it can take months to plant a seed, reach them at the right moment, nurture an opportunity from nascent lead to final sale, you really can't leave anything on the table. If you choose one prospecting tool to the exclusion of all the others, you're severely limiting your potential and constraining the flow of leads into your funnel. But if there's a downside to email, it's that it can lull us into the state of complacency where we're picking one tool to the exclusion of the others. The variety of email tools we have at our disposal, including automation, are so good at helping us do more with less. I kind of call it the email is easy trap. And it's based on the idea that email can make prospecting relatively easy and comfortable, especially when it's automated. You write a few messages, you set them up to send to your prospects over the course of several months, and then you wait for the replies to come in. So why would you ever pick up the phone to make a cold call and have a difficult and awkward conversation? Well, there are a lot of good reasons to cold call for cold calling's sake that we'll cover in another session later in the year. It's more direct. It teaches you to think on your feet. It makes you more confident in all aspects of prospecting. But for the purposes of today's topic, the number one reason not to abandon cold calling is that email prospecting and cold calling each work better when you perform them in tandem. So here's one really important example of that principle in action that we've shown before. Imagine you have an automated email prospecting campaign running here on the top with a target market of several thousand prospects. Maybe that list is based strictly on firmographic criteria like industry, company size, et cetera. And now you know you're reaching that list of several thousand prospects with an automated campaign that requires no ongoing effort from you other than fielding the responses. You can now use your cold calling time to focus on a much tighter set of your absolute best prospects. And you can call on those prospects much more frequently and consistently, improving your odds of breaking through. So when the alternative is to call a larger list of lower value prospects less frequently, you can really see how an automated strategy can sharpen your cold calling strategy. And you can also substitute this cold calling high value prospects with sending one-off emails to high value prospects. The idea is the automated campaign saves you time and energy to focus on higher value opportunities that you can devote more of your time and energy toward. And again, the key point here is that increasing efficiency does not mean figuring out how to prospect without doing any actual work. It means maximizing the odds that your hard work will pay off by ensuring that work is focused on engaging with high value or warm prospects. Of course, you can also combine email and cold calling in other more direct ways to maximize the effectiveness of both channels. One approach we like to use is to follow up a voicemail with a one-at-a-time email. It ensures you have a plan for when you can't get through to your prospect, which happens a lot, and it warms up both channels by anchoring them to each other. A prospect is often more likely to respond to an email follow-up than one sent out of the blue. So here's just one idea for a short and sweet voice message you can leave. And while this is just one tactic, it could and should be part of a broader planned out cadence that combines multiple emails, cold calls, voicemails, and other prospect touches. Again, the goal is to combine the various channels, email and otherwise, that you have at your disposal to maximize the odds of getting in front of the right prospect with the right offer at the right time. And a few final takeaways as we close out the presentation. First, as I just mentioned, prospecting these days is an all hands on deck situation. As cold outreach gets harder, it's critical to use all the tools in your toolbox. And that's because the more often you reach prospects in different ways, the better odds you have of creating that connection. Right message, right prospect, right time. And if you're not using all the tools and your competitors are, who do you think has the best odds? And then finally, if we automate for efficiency, we combine for effectiveness using email to amplify, reinforce, and sharpen cold calling and vice versa. Deb, any thoughts in conclusion?
Thanks, Sam. Well, you've certainly touched on a lot of different elements that can help improve our new business development process. I want to remind everybody about the 40-40-20 rule that we've covered before, and that has to do with what makes a direct marketing campaign successful. By direct marketing, it could be a cold call, an in-person call, a piece of postal mail, and certainly email. And 40% of the success of your direct marketing efforts comes from the offer. And Sam touched on the offer. By that, we mean, what do you want your prospect to do when they or respond when they read your message or hear your message? And then the other 40% that's determining the effectiveness of your outreach has to do with the list. And I hope everybody remembers that BusinessWise is going to give you the best opportunity to target your market with all of the firmographic information and trustworthy information to get to your right prospects. The final 20% is everything else, all of the other things that Sam touched on today. So we want to make sure that you've got the right list and the right offer. And when those are fixed, that final 20% can have a big effect. But if you don't have the right list and you don't have the right offer, nothing else you do is going to have much impact.
Thanks, Deb. It's really important stuff. So I realized I went through an entire presentation on cold email without actually showing you examples of cold email. So I just want to spend a couple minutes here at the end ticking through some examples and talking about how they compare to some of the tips that we gave today. So the first one I'm including here, this is obviously not your typical cold email from a sales rep. This is more of a marketing email. But I wanted to include it because the subject line I found to be pretty comical. This is a great example of a subject line that is clearly not coming from another human being wanting to have a conversation. This is a piece of marketing, and 99.9% of the time, I'm going to delete it because this is not somebody who's asking for my attention. So an example of a subject line that is clearly toward the creative, catchy marketing side of the spectrum. So this is an example in contrast, and this is from the gentleman I mentioned earlier who runs an organization called Outbound Squad. He hosted a cold email webinar that I attended recently. This is sort of similar to a newsletter. It's got a bunch of resources that he's suggesting I look at, but you can see it's much more conversational. I'm much more likely to dive into this. And then the subject line is so simple and pretty boring, but it's clear. It tells me what's inside and makes it much more likely that I might click on it because it's either a human being looking for a response or because I'm interested in checking out what's in there because it might be of value to me. So a good contrast from the first email. The next two examples are actually both from the same organization that produces different types of content for clients. And you'll see here, the subject line here, educate them, then sell them. Again, it's a little too clever. This is not something that I would ever expect another human to write to me. This looks like a piece of marketing, and by virtue of that fact, I'm much more likely to ignore it. And you can see that the email is not that conversational. But again, the subject line here just doesn't do the trick. But in contrast, this is from the same organization. Here's a subject line that I would be much more likely to open and respond to because it's more conversational. It's not quite clear, but it teases that there's something inside that I might be interested in, and it sounds much more like it's coming from a regular human being. And you can see here, this is sort of an interesting way of framing the offer. Right at the beginning, they talk about that they're trying to sell me something. You can use your own judgment about whether you think this is an effective way to do it. I think there are probably more effective ways to get at the same point that don't come across as sort of backhandedly pitchy, but an interesting approach to getting through that initial phase of, okay, we're both selling, I'm selling you something, I'm offering something of value, I'm asking for something in return. Let's get that out of the way. I mentioned earlier that in addition to subject lines, consistency and follow-ups were an important way to shake loose responses and maximize your odds of your prospect reading and receiving your email. Here's an example that we use in one of our prospecting campaigns. You'll see the subject line here, super short, not very specific. Typically, I wouldn't use this, but because it was one subject line in a series, I thought it was an interesting approach to try. And very short and to the point, haven't heard back from you, just confirming, is this a priority for you? And if it isn't, we're likely not the right fit. So trying to establish that mutual beneficial relationship. We're trying to offer you something that might help you. We're hoping to get something that might help us. If that's not going to work, then we don't want to bother you and waste your time. This is an example of an email where personalization was taken to sort of an extreme and ended up being not very effective. So you can see the initial sentence says, I was about to call you, and then they have the phone number here. And I blacked it out because it is a real phone number, but it did not happen to be the actual phone number for Scott. So he read it and instantly knew that this was not something personal to him because they got his phone number wrong, even though they used to try to be personal. And then you see here at the end, I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, you're based in the Atlanta area. Have you ever tried, and this is the name of a restaurant. My cousin was telling me good things about it. Turns out that Scott knows this restaurant and doesn't like it. So this is an example of how people sort of overthink personalization and ignore the idea of offering a relevant, valuable offer that provides something of value to the prospect. And then finally, this is just an example of sort of a typical introductory message that we use in our email prospecting campaigns. And you can see here, the subject line is prospecting idea, and then we have the company name, short, to the point, clear, and very human sounding. And then we try to stay away from using I and we. We use it a few times, but for the most part, we're using you, we're asking questions, trying to elicit a response. When we do talk about our product, we do it quickly, and then we move on to the other benefits that a conversation might provide to the prospect. And then at the very end, we sort of ask an open-ended question designed to elicit that response so that we can start a conversation. We don't even ask for an appointment. We're simply asking a question about a challenge that they might face and hinting at the fact that a more reliable, consistent local biz dev strategy might help with that problem.